Welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and in this video series we've been talking about set-apart communities. What are set-apart communities? Why are they so very important? And why does Yahweh expect us all to participate in one and to help build his son's kingdom through set-apart community? Well, when we're talking about set-apart community, what we're really talking about is people organized in right relationship so as to build a governmental structure, or in this case, or society, or in this case, Yeshua's kingdom. So anytime you get people organized in right relationship, you're going to end up with some who are going to be in wrong relationship. Either they're not hearing in the Spirit, or they're quenching the Spirit, or they're not paying attention to those who do hear in the Spirit and are trying to help lead them and guide them. So what we're talking about in context is the need for what's called the Matthew 18 process. We've talked a little bit about the Matthew 18 process in earlier installments in this video series, but what we want to talk about now is we want to begin talking about how the Matthew 18 process works when there's cases of adultery. So this will be a multi-part series, and when they train bank tellers to spot phony currency, what they do first is they teach them how to identify good or proper legitimate currency. And then once they know what legitimate currency looks like, then they can compare it to phony currency, and the phony currency doesn't have the same characteristics. It doesn't have the same hallmarks, so to speak. So what we'd like to do to start this series is first we'd like to explain what proper Hebrew society and what proper Hebrew marriages should look like. We want to teach people to identify proper relationships. Then we can teach them to identify what goes wrong within relationships in the concept of Hebrew society. So the nuclear family, as we've said in earlier sections, is considered the basic building block of society, or at least of secular society. Now, in the dispersion, we might say that the basic building block of Yeshua's kingdom is the set-apart community. In other words, a spiritual family. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. Now, when we live in the land of Israel, we're going to see that in the land of Israel, we're going to have physical set-apart communities that are going to be made up of nuclear families that are all in the faith. So in other words, whatever settlement or community we live in, all of the families are going to be in the faith together. So our physical communities will be the same as our spiritual communities. But in dispersion, that's not always the case. So for example, we know in Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu chapter 3 and verse 14, Yahweh is speaking to the northern house of Ephraim and also to those of our brothers in Judah who are presently assigned to Ephraim in the dispersion. And Yahweh says, "Return, O backsliding children, says Yahweh, for I am married to you." We'll talk about that in future installments. But he says, "I will take you, one from a city and two from a family, and I will bring you to Sion." Well, again, when we come back to the land, we're going to have physical communities that are also made up of families, nuclear families, that are all going to be in the faith. But in the meantime, in the dispersion, that's just not the case. Many of us are isolated. Our families are not in the faith. Some of our families are very hostile to the faith. Sometimes you have one spouse that's devout and the other spouse either is not as devout or even the spouse doesn't believe. So in the meantime, we just need to do the best that we can. But we're going to try to talk about what community should look like. And once we understand what spiritual community should look like, then we can understand how to help each other get there over time. Now, when we come back to the land of Israel, there's going to be a lot of changes in lifestyle for those who've been raised in the democratic West, because Scripture never advocates democracy for any reason, doesn't advocate it for anything. Sometimes people believe that Acts chapter 15 was a democratic process. Sometimes people believe Acts 21 was a democratic process. But democracy is not advocated in Scripture, because effectively what democracy is when people do what seems good and right in their own eyes. Effectively, it's mob rule. That doesn't work in Yahweh's kingdom. So what Scripture actually advocates instead is anointed servant leadership. And that's what we see both in the Tanakh, or the Old Covenant, and in the Brit Hadashah, or the Renewed Covenant. And that's where those who are anointed to serve, basically you end up with those who are strong in the Spirit serving those who are less strong in the Spirit. And those who are less strong in the Spirit voluntarily follow the lead of those who are serving them. Those are the stronger ones in the Spirit. And that's the opposite of Babylonian culture, where the strong basically exploit the weak. So what we have to do in order to follow this model, we have to learn, those of us who do hear in the Spirit and do receive direction from Yahweh, we have to be disposed to serve others. And those who are not as strong in that need to know to take direction and leadership and guidance from those who are attempting to serve Yahweh's people in the correct direction. Now, the other thing is that in Yahweh's system, there's also what we might call Spirit-led patriarchy. Now, a lot of people are very concerned about patriarchy. Many people misunderstand what patriarchy is. There's been a lot of abuse of the patriarchal system in the past. So some people are very hesitant with regard to patriarchy. But that is the model that Scripture speaks of. And we can't change that. We don't want to change that. So let's talk about what patriarchy is and isn't, because that's going to form the basis for our society. We're going to have servant-led, anointed servants leading, but we're also having a patriarchal framework, a fraternal patriarchal framework. So in a fraternal patriarchal framework, the husband and the wife are one flesh. And we all know from Scripture that that's when the man leads. He has both the authority and the responsibility, and then the woman supports the man in the marriage. But together they form one flesh. They form one unit. That's not as in democracy. You effectively have split families because you have two votes, you have two units effectively, instead of having only one unit. Now, the way it works in Scripture is that husbands and wives are supposed to discuss everything together because they both have important points of view. The woman is given as a complement to the man. So the husband and wife should discuss everything together and come to an agreement, and, well, or at least come to an understanding of each other's positions. And then it's the man's job as the priest of the household to go to Yahweh and listen in the Spirit, so as to let the Spirit be the one to make the decisions. And if the Spirit isn't the one making the decisions, then you have men and women, you have flesh and blood making the decisions. And there's no way that can work in Spirit-led community. The only way Spirit-led community can work is when men and women let the Spirit make the decisions according to Yahweh's model. It's very important. So, and again, if people are not able to hear in the Spirit, then they need to take direction from those who do hear in the Spirit. There's no other way that set-apart community can work. And so when we establish our own miniature set-apart communities in anticipation of the day when we come back together in the land and live together in the land, our set-apart communities need to be Spirit-led. Those who are strong in the Spirit need to serve those who are weak in the Spirit, and those who are weak in the Spirit need to listen and take the questions to Yahweh in the Spirit. So, and that way the Spirit is the one leading and not men doing the leading, or not men or women doing the leading. That's very critical. There's no way around that. And if people don't agree to that, then basically, sad to say, they don't have a place in Yahweh's spiritual set-apart communities, or really effectively in the kingdom. So another factor in patriarchy is, and again, this has been historically abused, is that the man is supposed to love his wife as he loves himself, because husband and wife are one flesh. Now, a man in Yahweh's or Yeshua's kingdom is supposed to love Yahweh as Elohim with all of his heart, with all of his soul, and with all of his strength. And he's also supposed to love his neighbor as he loves himself. And if he doesn't do that, then again, he has no place in Yahweh's millennial kingdom. He has no place in Yeshua's set-apart community. So one way or another, lovingly, gently, kindly, he needs to be put outside the camp, at least under the Melchizedekian model. And we'll talk more about that in future installments. Now, really, there's no getting around this. This is another one of these basic prerequisites that people, they poo-poo it, so to speak. But they asked Yeshua, which is the most important of the commandments? And he says, the first of all of the commandments. He's quoting Deuteronomy 6:4 and 6:5, the great Shema. And he says, hear, O Israel, Yahweh our Elohim. Yahweh is one, or united, or integrated. And he says, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And he says, this is the first commandment, not a suggestion. It's a commandment. And it's the greatest of the commandments. And he says, the second is like it, and it's this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. And a lot of times people forget that these are the two most important commandments. And if we don't live these as commandments, really there's no way to make set-apart community work. We've got to be our brother's keepers. We've got to look out for our brother. We have to value our brother at least as much as we value ourselves. And we have to love our wives as one flesh. So again, if people can do this, then set-apart community is possible if we're listening in the Spirit, if we're taking direction from the Spirit. But if we're not listening in the Spirit and we're not taking direction in the Spirit, there's no way to establish a Spirit-led community. The only way to establish a Spirit-led community is to let the Spirit lead. So Yeshua here is quoting also in Vayikra or Leviticus 19 starting in verse 17, where it says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall surely reprove or rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. He says, you shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He says, I am Yahweh. And when Yahweh says, I am Yahweh, what he's really saying is, I mean it. Pay attention to this one. You can easily miss this one. Pay attention, because this one's important. And this is a good example of what's sometimes called Hebrew block logic. And that's where you take these two seemingly opposite concepts, but you put them together in the same block of text. And so basically what Yahweh is doing is he's describing, you might say, two sides of the same coin, or these are the two edges of the sword, which cuts both ways. And so what we're really talking about here is a people who love Yahweh so much, and they love their neighbor so much, and they want to help each other grow together in Yahweh's ways day by day. So that's one of the things about set-apart community. And this is something that is quite often, quite frankly, lost in Ephraimite society, is that, and it's really ironic, you end up with people who believe in Yeshua, and they say that they love their neighbor so much that if someone says one word against that they don't like, people break fellowship over the tiniest of things. We're commanded not to take offense easily. And it's just amazing how easily people take offense in the Ephraimite side of Israel. And one of the reasons that I believe that one of the reasons this is that the Ephraimites don't have as clear of a concept as they need to, that our purpose here is building Yeshua's kingdom. Now, Brother Judah at least has the understanding that he's supposed to be building a kingdom. Now, sadly, those who reject Yeshua are building an anti-Yeshua kingdom, but they are actually building a kingdom. If you take a look at the news and you take a look at the Revelation timeline, we know that the Black Horse is very, very active in establishing an anti-Yeshua global kingdom. So it's the wrong kingdom, but at least they're doing it. They understand that there is a need to establish a kingdom, and so they're going about it the wrong way because they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing, but at least they're attempting to build a kingdom. So because of this is why our brothers in Judah are so famous or infamous perhaps for arguing, is because they know they're trying to establish a kingdom, so they're willing to get in there and they're willing to discuss and argue things out with one another and not take offense. So, and because of this, they're able to form very strong bonds. So Scripture calls Ephraim beauty, but it calls Judah bands or bonds. And that's because Judah understands he has a mission to perform, to build a kingdom, the wrong one, but to build a kingdom. So Judah is willing to get in there and discuss things. Whereas the Ephraimites, if you say one word wrong to them, they're gone. So this is something that we need to understand, is that both now in the dispersion and when we come back to the land of Israel, we have a joint mission to perform. And that mission is to establish Yeshua's kingdom by way of the Great Commission, the fivefold ministry, and the combined foundation of apostles and prophets. We talk about that a lot in other sections of our studies. But the idea here behind this Hebrew block logic, Leviticus 19 and 17 and 18, is that every man in society, if he loves Yeshua, if he's trying to help build Yeshua's kingdom, he's supposed to hold every other man, every other brother, so effectively a husband and wife are one flesh, but he's supposed to hold everyone else accountable, and then everyone else also holds him accountable. And ideally the way this works, or the way it should work together, is that each man helps each other and encourages each other day by day, as the Apostle Shaul encourages us to do. That we try to encourage each other along and become better servants for our King. We also see another aspect of this in Mishlei, or Proverbs 27 and verse 17. Tells us that as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the face or the countenance of his friend, kind of like a whetstone. So the idea is that I'm going to help you in your walk. If you see something, you're going to help me in my walk. We're going to speak the truth in love together. And then all the families in the community, and in the dispersion, there's not always a family, but all the families and all the individuals, we're going to help each other in love by speaking the truth in love. And day by day, we're going to help establish and build the kingdom. That's what it speaks of in Ephesians chapter 4. A very important aspect. It's a loving, but it's an active love. It's not a passive love. It's an active kind of a love. And we have to be grown-ups enough not to take offense easily and not to leave when someone brings us a word of discipline. This discipline, it's amazing how many people consider themselves to be disciples, but they don't want to exercise any discipline. So we need to remember who it is that we're serving and what it is that we're trying to do. We're trying to build Yeshua's kingdom. And there's some basics to this. So another concept when we're trying to learn what proper Hebrew culture looks like is that when boys and girls are born, of course, they're going to fall under the headship of their parents. So, but husband and wife are one flesh, and the man is in the position of the priest of the household. So he has both the authority and the responsibility. So ultimately, boys and girls are going to fall under the headship of their father. But again, husband and wife being one loving flesh. Now, in Western society, what happens is that you end up with young men and women. They grow up to be 18 or 19 or 20, 21, whatever the age of majority is where they live. And then they turn out to be independent individuals, and they leave home and they have their own lives. And I'm 18, I'll do what I want, and these kinds of things. And that's just not correct in Hebrew society. The concept in Hebrew society is that rather than growing up to become independent and leaving home, what happens is, for men, first we'll talk about men, then we'll talk about women. The sons are going to grow up to take their place in the family, in relationship to the family. And not only in relationship to the family, but also in relationship to the greater community at large. And if we talk about the tribes, at least in ancient times, they would take their place within the tribe. So whether they lived at home or whether they lived even in a separate home, the sons were subject to their fathers so long as their fathers still lived, and of course in context are obeying the Torah. It's just like a woman is supposed to obey a wife rather, is supposed to obey her husband in Yeshua, or in the Master. So if the husband tells her to do something that's not in Yeshua, she's not supposed to do it. But if he tells her to do something in Yeshua, then he has the authority and the responsibility, so she should support him in that. Sons is the same way. We live our lives in relationship. So as long as your father was in the faith and was telling you what to do in the faith, then you obeyed his instructions in the faith. If he told you to do something outside of the faith or something apart from Elohim, then of course you shouldn't do it, because even within families, you would still help your parents in a respectful and loving way. You would help to hold them accountable. So the relationship doesn't end at 18. The relationship doesn't end at the age of majority, 20 or 21 or whatever it is where people live. The age of majority is 20 in Scripture. But the relationship doesn't end. You continue to live as part of your family, and you continue to live as part of the greater overall community. So, and again, so the spiritual family is what holds that all together, at least in the dispersion. So for girls, it's slightly different. So girls are also born under their father's headship, but in Scripture, the role for men is to provide headship, and women receive headship, or they receive covering. So girls are also born under their father's headship. Now, when a man takes a wife, technically what's happening in a legal sense is that her headship is being transferred from her father to her husband. And this is, at least historically, why a groom would ask the groom would ask his wife's father for his wife's hand in marriage. Because literally what he's asking is for the father to consent to transfer her headship to him. That's literally what's taking place in a legal sense. So in the concept of a patriarchal fraternity, what we need to understand is that there's a sense of honor that goes on in Hebraic society, especially in marriage, especially with regard to vows and promises. When someone gives their word, how very important that is. But in the context of patriarchal fraternity, it was understood. When we read Scripture, we can see how it's understood that a man is supposed to love his wife as much as he would want someone to love his daughters. Because effectively what a man is doing when he's asking his wife's, or his fiance's father for her hand, is he's asking, may I have your daughter so that I can have her headship, so I can love her as much as you love her. And he should do that because he would expect that his daughters, he should be able to expect that his sons-in-law should also love his daughters just as much as he would. So that's the basic concept. And that, of course, has been forgotten historically throughout the years. But how very important it is for the men to fulfill this role. Because if the men don't fulfill this role, look what happens. The society begins to unravel and fall apart. So there's also the concept of honor in a marital sense. And honor in Hebraic culture is a huge thing. It's a very important concept. And it's expected in context that we're going to love Yahweh our Elohim enough to use the Spirit to overrule and control and discipline our flesh. And one of the manifestations, one of many manifestations of that, is that we're going to be virginal at the time of our marriages. Now, the Apostle Shaul or Paul speaks to this in context in 1 Corinthians or Korinthim Aleph chapter 9 and verse 27. He says, but I discipline my body and I bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others that I myself should become disqualified. So this is really a big concept, is that we are supposed to learn. And this is also the concept of weaning, is that when a child is properly weaned, his body, he or she should begin to have his body in subjection to the Spirit. And that's what it means. Today, it just means that you're no longer taking milk. But biblically speaking, and even as recent as a couple hundred years ago, 200 or 300 years ago, it was expected that when children were weaned, they were to begin to behave like young adults. And that's such a very important concept. It's one of these things, again, that's lost in democratic society, because now people just let children grow up without discipline. Now the concept is, just let the children grow up, let children be children. Whereas that's not the scriptural concept at all. In Scripture, the concept is that when we wean children, we're teaching children to behave like young adults. So it's an entirely different concept of society. But this is something that's very necessary in set-apart community, is to teach children effectively to be civilized, to learn to control their body, to control their flesh, and to bring it into subjection to the Spirit. And to begin that early, so they have plenty of time to practice that before they themselves begin to raise children. And of course, also in Scripture, not only is there a sense of honor and a sense of fraternal responsibility, but there's also the concept that we're not supposed to provide false witness against another. We're not supposed to testify in a negative fashion against anyone else. So for example, we're talking about adultery and the Matthew 18 process. So for example, one of the basic Torah rules is that Yahweh tells us that if a man marries a virgin and they go through with the agreement, and then he tries to divorce her on the pretext that she's allegedly or accusedly not a virgin, then the other men of the town are supposed to punish him. However, if she's truly not a virgin at the time of her wedding, then not only can the wedding be canceled, but she is to be stoned with stones until she dies, so that the evil is put out of Israel. Now that's a rule for in the land of Israel. That's not a rule for outside the land of Israel. We'll talk about this in more detail in 2 video sections. Very important here, and we'll answer certain questions. So I know there's certain questions that come up with regard to that. Hang on, we'll talk about that in 2 sections more. But the basic rule in Torah we find in Deuteronomy or Devarim, chapter 22, starting in verse 13. And Yahweh tells us that if any man takes a wife, and remember, a man is supposed to love his wife as he loves himself. So if any man takes a wife and goes into her, meaning he consummates the marriage, and then later on he detests her, and he decides to do something evil, he decides to charge her with shameful conduct so he can divorce her and get rid of her, and he wants to bring a bad name on her. So he says, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found she was not a virgin. He says, well, what are we supposed to do here? So we're starting to talk about the Matthew 18 process. He says, then the father and mother of the young woman shall take and bring out the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders at the gate of the city. Now, we talk about this in other places, but the concept was that in ancient times, at least, the parents would save the sheets of the wedding night so that any blood that was shed would be there on the sheets. Now, this is problematic. We don't have time to go off on a tangent, but recent studies have indicated that really effectively only about half of women bleed when they lose their virginity. So there's all kinds of questions we don't have time to get into here, but basically what's supposed to happen is that the parents are supposed to provide evidence that the daughter was in fact a virgin at the time of the wedding. And so the parents then bring the sheets to the elders at the city gates, and the young woman's father shall say to the elders at the city gates, look, I gave my virgin daughter to this man as a wife, and now he detests her. So he's trying to give false witness against her. So now he's charged her with shameful conduct. And he said, I found your daughter was not a virgin. But look, Here's the evidences of my daughter's virginity. So then they're supposed to spread the wedding sheets before the elders at the city gates. And then when the elders of the city gates, we're talking about Matthew 18 process, when the elders of that city, or in our context of the congregation, see that the man is lying, they see that the man is conducting false witness, they're supposed to take that man and punish him. And that's probably a very nice way of saying that they're supposed to beat him or thrash him until he repents and realizes that that's not something that's supposed to be done. In Hebrew society, lying and giving false witness is not acceptable. And again, that's something that no one who's a part of the nation of Israel or part of a set-apart community is allowed to do. And it says, and further, they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, and that works out to about 400 days' wages, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he's brought a bad name on a virgin of Israel, and she shall be his wife, and he's not allowed to divorce her all his days. So, and there's a lot of things we could say about this passage. It's a difficult passage for many to understand, but basically also one of the things we need to know is that in ancient times, it was typically a father would give most, if not all, of the bride's dowry to the bride. So one would hope that the father would also give this 100 shekels of silver also to the bride, and then it would be known in context what happened. So the young man who decided to bring the false witness would be under scrutiny to treat her correctly. And this would be, of course, watched by the elders of the city, and then again, in modern context, would be watched by the elders of any spiritual congregation. Continuing in verse 20, Yahweh tells us, but if the thing is true, and the evidences of virginity are not found for the young woman, then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her to death with stones, because she's done a disgraceful thing in Israel, to play the harlot in her father's house. So you shall put away the evil from among you. So the concept, again, is that there is no room in Israelite society or in set-apart community for those who are not willing to obey the basic rules of honor and correct conduct. So, however, what we need to understand is that these are the rules that apply to judges. And the rule for individuals was always that of forgiveness. And that's why we see in Matityahu, or Matthew chapter 1 and verse 19, it tells us that then Yosef, Miriam's husband, being a just man or a righteous man or a tzaddik in Hebrew, he says, and not wanting to make Miriam a public example, was minded to put her away secretly. So once again, judges in Israel would judge according to the Torah, but then the rule for individuals was always to forgive, and it was considered to be just if one forgave an offense. But once again, order and justice has to be maintained inside the nation. So if you'd like to know more about the rules for marriages in Hebraic community, we discuss the rules for marriage in Hebraic community both when living in the land of Israel under the Levitical order, and also when living in the Dispersion under the Melchizedekian order in the study Yahweh's Heart in Marriage. And you can find that in the Covenant Relationships collection. We also have a video on our YouTube channel for that. But what we want to do now, we want to just summarize the differences between the Western democratic societies in which most people have grown up and Hebraic community. And some of the differences that we see is that set-apart communities are considered the basic building blocks of Yeshua's kingdom. So it doesn't matter whether we're physically related or not. The thing is that we're all united in Yeshua's spirit, and that's what makes us the basic building block. Now, in the dispersion, many of us don't have physical families that are in the faith, and all we have is our spiritual family. So again, that's especially why in the dispersion, the spiritual family or the congregation or the set-apart community is the basic building block of Yeshua's kingdom. We also saw that when we return to the land of Israel, we're going to have both put together, both the physical and the spiritual aspects. So our settlements or our communities in the land of Israel will be comprised of families that are all together in the faith, such that at that time, our physical communities are going to be the same thing as our spiritual communities. We're going to be all there together as one. We also saw that set-apart communities do not operate by democracy. Rather, they operate by anointed, spirit-led servant leadership. And we also saw that spiritual communities are based on the patriarchal structure in which husband and wife are one flesh. Now, the husband has both the authority and the responsibility to lead, and he also has the duty to love his wife as he loves himself. And that's going to play an important role in the next couple of parts when we talk more about this. He also has the duty to love his wife as he would want his own daughters, ideally, to be loved. So there's a real sense of honor and a real sense of duty that each member of the community is going to do his part, and he's also going to hold others accountable to do their parts as well. So every man in a set-apart community has the responsibility to help every other brother in the community with his walk. Just as iron sharpens iron, a man is going to help sharpen the face of his friend. And that's something that requires a lot of spiritual maturity. We can't just break fellowship just because someone spoke a word of discipline to us. So if we love Yahweh with all that we have, and if we also love our neighbor as we love ourselves, then what that really means is we're going to want to help our brothers improve their walk. We're going to help our brothers to walk as good as they can before Yahweh, because that pleases Yahweh, and it also helps our brothers to get their best reward in the day of judgment. And then in return, our brothers are also going to tell us when they see something in our walk that's insufficient. So again, it's going to be a very active form of love that goes on in Hebrew community. It's not that we are perfect and everyone's already walking in the Spirit and no one can say anything to us because we'll get offended and we'll leave. That has no place in Yeshua's kingdom. Yeshua's kingdom, we're all supposed to help each other forward day by day with the objective and the purpose of building Yeshua's global kingdom. And that purpose is oftentimes forgotten or lost in the Messianic movement. We need to remember that in Nazarene Israel. We also see that there's a strong code of honor in Hebraic community, especially in the marital sense. So as a husband, you want to treat your wife just as you would want your own daughter to be ideally loved by your sons-in-law. And again, these are commandments. The commandment is to love Yahweh our Elohim with everything that we have and to put him first. And then to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And also husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. And if these commandments are not kept, then really set-apart community can't work. So these are the basic ground rules that need to be followed in order for Hebraic set-apart community to work. Now, with all that as a background, please join us again next week for part 2 of Adultery in Matthew 18. We're going to talk about how we handle cases of adultery in the land of Israel under the Levitical order. And then 2 weeks from now, join us again for part 3 of Adultery in Matthew 18, where we're going to talk about how to handle cases of adultery in the dispersion under the Melchizedekian order. And what we're going to see is that the principles and precepts are the same, even though some of the specific applications are different. So please join us again next week for Matthew 18 and Adultery, Part 2. Shalom.